The Yes campaign was the very first political campaign I was ever a part of, and as someone with no experience in politics, it was incredibly welcoming to me. I learnt so much and I met so many incredible people over the course of that campaign.
I was going to be able to vote for just a month before the referendum. I actually was going to turn 16 and I would actually be able to vote.
In terms of moments where I thought things were going forward really well, some of them were just from the personal involvement of speaking at the big meetings alongside others called by the SSP in towns as varied as Ayr and Paisley and elsewhere, where we had hundreds of those meetings, and it was phenomenal. And the feedback and the feel of those meetings was an indication that there was a raw movement arising out in the housing estates and schemes.
I thought, well, okay, even if the referendum doesn't go my way, I thought this has still been worth it, because all of a sudden it seemed like a sleeping giant had woken up.
And I think activity is the key. Yes, there was the big set piece actions such as the marches in Edinburgh up to Kilton Hill, there were the big events at George Square, but the main thing for me and the lesson that I took from it is that the key activity is the one-to-one engagement with the public. So the canvassing, the conversations we had in the workplaces, the stalls that we had regularly, the leafleting that we did, all of that grew a life of its own. So much so that by the end of the campaign, yes, we're describing it as a campaign that was out of control, but in a good way, in the sense that they couldn't possibly control that because there were so many people involved doing so much stuff.
Canvassing was incredible because the number of people you spoke to and the genuine interest from so many people, especially you got people in their 20s, in their 30s and in their 40s who had never voted, who would stand on their doorstep for 20-30 minutes speaking to you about what kind of country Scotland should be. So much of this campaign was beautiful. It was the way it was ad hoc, it was improvised, it was self-organised. It really did feel empowering to be a part of a campaign like that. I don't know if I'll ever be a part of a campaign as broad, as massive, as successful in many ways as the Yes campaign was.
I went on the first Radical Independence campaign mass canvass. It was dark, I think it was March, it was in Easterhouse. It was a bit grim. And I'd canvassed there many times for socialist campaigns and elections, socialist candidates. And the first door I knocked, an old woman came and it was about 8 o'clock at night, she had her dressing gown on. And I thought, oh, probably Labour voter. She had white hair, she was that older generation like my mum. And I said to her, how are you voting me and my friend Carol? And she said, oh, I'm voting for independence. And you could have knocked us down my foot. And we said, is there anyone else in the house? And she said, oh, and he's voting for independence as well. And then the next door we knocked, there was an older man and he invited us in for a cup of tea or a whiskey. And we went in briefly, but we didn't have the whiskey. And he was voting yes. And then we went to another door and we got invited in again for a chat with a young woman with 2 children who wasn't sure how she was going to vote. And we had to say hello to the iguana as well, who was very supportive and didn't bite us and was okay. So I knew then that people wanted to engage in the discussion.
About 2 weeks before the actual referendum, probably about the 10th of September, around that time, I actually for the first time thought we could actually win this, because it was everywhere. People who had been against it and so kind of vocal about it were actually starting to quieten down a bit, and actually some of them were coming on board with the Yes campaign. I think of even some of my friends who were very sceptical about it, and all of a sudden even they were sharing things on their Facebooks and on social media. So around about kind of 2 weeks before the actual vote, I was so convinced we were going to get it. I just thought there's such a positive energy surrounding the Yes campaign.
I was canvassing in Partick. It was a beautiful summer's night. I was canvassing with 2 other women, and again we kept getting asked in for cups of tea. It shows you people want to engage. And so I knocked on this door and the door opened and it was a hallway, and there's a huge, really big picture of a young man in an army uniform, and I wasn't sure, and there was a Union Jack, and I wasn't sure how it was going to go, and his mum came to the door and she said, oh yeah, we're all voting yes in this house. And I said, everybody? She said yes. 2 sons in the army, both voting yes. One's in Iraq, he's voting yes by proxy, and the other one's voting yes as well. And I just thought, this is different. We're definitely shifting opinion here.
In Glasgow, and particularly in the city centre, you'd go into the city centre, the place was awash with Yes supporters, and I'd always thought if you can win Glasgow, you can win in Scotland, because Glasgow's obviously been traditionally Labour. If you associate with Unionists, it probably wasn't actually the best barometer, but it was clear we were going to win in Glasgow, and that made me think we were going to win everywhere.
We raised issues of public ownership to redistribute wealth. We had the slogan out on street stalls, for example, right throughout the west of Scotland, especially for a good year and a half, of vote yes for a decent minimum wage.
In particular, when I was doing that in Charleston, which is where I lived as a wee boy, I was just amazed. You know, people who had faced such hardship genuinely having hope for something better and wanting to play a part in that process of creating a fairer Scotland.
On the Saturday before, which was amazing, it's the best atmosphere that I've ever been in any campaign. We filled the concert hall steps, it was sunny, people were dancing, they were singing. It was like a big huge love-in. It just felt so good that people were coming together to do something so positive. It was in the air, there was something in the air. They talk about Woodstock, I think this was my Woodstock.
Up until we got there, I was still sure we were going to win. I had a good feeling being at polling stations all day. We were getting really good responses from people in areas where we weren't sure how we were going to get on.
And I remember the referendum day having mixed emotions. I'd been sadly disappointed that we'd lost, but immensely proud that what we'd achieved, that 45% of people had voted for it.
I think if like the lesson that had been learned by the establishment had been, look, we need some sort of federalism, the system can't work, it doesn't make any sense. But they're not going to do that. They've had their opportunity for a long time, and they're not going to do that.
The unionist parties are probably pushing independence inadvertently faster than we need to, almost. I think their policies are going to essentially push people away from the idea of the union.
Really, one of my regrets is not joining sooner. So I could have gotten more involved in the actual campaign out on the streets.
I believe that independence was the thing that could actually take Scotland forward and promote a socialist agenda. But I think we need to look at independence as a process. You know, we started off at around 20% of people wanting it. We then got to 45%. It's not over yet. We'll continue to campaign for it. It is just a process.
The sense I have, as I said at the time, is this has only been deferred. Independence has only been delayed, like the train up the road to Waverley.
For some who decided that they didn't want to take the leap and the risk and the uncertainty, which had been whipped up by the media in particular and the Better Together fear project, for some people now the realities of Tory rule, Westminster rule, are dawning on them, where people are beginning to realise that the warnings we made as the SSP last year are accurate, that failure to get independence means failure to defend your incomes, your working tax credits, your wage, your rights at work, your benefits, and everyday services that people rely on.
Well, for the future of the independence movement, I think it's definitely going to happen. I think there's only so long it's going to happen as a result of consecutive years of Tories in Westminster and the various policies that they make which anger the people of Scotland.
But surely having the ruling Tory government who only got 10% of the vote in Scotland, surely that's a change of circumstances.
We need independence in the context of us already creating a different sort of world, you know, and we can do that here, but we can do that in terms of how we work with people around the world, in terms of supporting people in, you know, in the rest of Europe and the rest of the world.
The referendum changed me, and it changed hundreds of thousands of others, and most importantly, the referendum made us more confident. The referendum made it feel as if, you know, we did have a voice and we could use it, and so many of us had never realised that before.
What we have to discuss and debate is how do we argue for a second referendum? When do we have it? How are we going to win it? In principle, amongst our objectives is how do we persuade many of those people who voted no a year ago to vote yes next time? And we're really encouraged by the polls recently that have shown that people are open-minded to independence who were perhaps closed-minded to it a year ago.
I think Rise is going to be a machine driving forward the combined left-wing forces of Scotland. I think it's going to be an absolute powerhouse socialist movement compared to ones we've seen in recent years. And I think it's already getting enough media attention. It's already getting more attention from people than we've seen in ages. And
we're organising Rise and Govern, but we're trying to get all the local community groups, because Govern has about 180 local community groups, to come forward and say what they would like, what is their vision for Govern, how can things be taken forward in Govern. That's what Rise should be reflecting. Rise should be engaging with these groups and actually finding out what support these groups need to take it forward.
I just don't see there being any contradiction between what we're doing in fighting austerity and what we're doing in mapping out that vision of an independent Scotland. The two things are completely commensurate. As socialists within the Yes movement, the wider independence movement, it was always about what was going to be the best way of bringing about the type of society that we want. We still fundamentally believe that that can be most appropriately pursued via an independent country.
It was the referendum that led me to join the Scottish Socialist Party, and what we said at the time, that we were proud to be part of Yes Scotland, is still true for me. I'm still Yes and I'm still proud.